Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on J Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Exploring truth, exposing deception, that's a big part of what we're going to do today. And hopefully, along the way, it will inspire courage, because our guest today is an author. He's an investigator. He's someone who spent a lot of years, folks, digging into the deep antediluvian past, the pre-flood days, talking about the giants, the Nephilim, and other little fairy creatures that I don't know a whole lot about, but he does. He's going to talk about that today. But what I'm really interested in is the way that ties into today. I was telling him off camera, half my audience just digs this stuff. They're the blurry creatures audience. They want to understand, how the pyramids were made, all that kind of stuff. The other side wants to know about Kari Lake and the recent news. And is that whole leak that happened, is that a psyop or is it not? There's another group that says, hey, is things like 23andMe, or is that a recruitment or a location tool to find people that have special bloodlines? And hey, I'm not the expert on that. Our guest is. And the reason I said it'll inspire courage, to do that as a lifelong job, I don't know that he's getting a lot of calls from the Smithsonian or the Discovery Channel to say, hey, this is undiscovered stuff, man. Come on, we need to have you. You would, if they were smart, they would do that. But I imagine that line of work comes with its own share of difficulty, even though it may be a labor of love. So with that, my friend Gary Wayne, thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you for inviting me onto your show. I'm so happy to be here today. And if people haven't read my book or haven't heard me on a podcast or a radio show, I think you're in for kind of an eye-opening experience. So really happy to communicate with your audience.
I would say even if they have read your book and they have heard your podcast, they don't need to tune away. They need to stay here, because we're going to excavate some new truths today. I've got a strong feeling. Real quick, before we move on to the actual substance, tell us about the book. I know that you've got, this is like the second in a 2-part series at this point.
It is. And so book one is probably one of the most unique books out there in almost any kind of genre, but specifically into, the giant and the prehistory and the prophecy genre. And it's unlike any other book because it ties in all of the different players from the polytheist side and what the Christian perspective is on those events in prehistory, what happened throughout history, what's going on today, and how the spurious forces are trying to bring about the end time. And so it connects all of those dots. And when we're talking about giants, it is absolutely embedded not only in our history, but in secret societies, in the royal bloodlines, in how this whole world works as they answer to the invisible ones as the visible ones and their spurious offspring.
Now, what's that word you're saying? Spurious? Is that like nefarious? What is that?
Well, it's kind of like that. It is like a counterfeit. And if, just to use a word that is not, I don't want to get it bleeped. It's like an offspring that's illegitimate or outside of a marriage. So in this case, spurious are the giants, who are the offspring of the fallen angels or the gods in polytheism. And they're illegitimate, but they receive legitimacy and authority from their celestial mafia godfathers, as I like to call them.
I've never heard that phrase. I'm going to start using it. You didn't trademark that, did you? Celestial mafia godfathers.
No, I did not trademark that, but I just love the phrases.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump in with what might be the most important question that everybody wants to know. All right. And are there Nephilim bloodlines around today? But part two of that question is, what if I'm one? Like, how do I find out if I'm a Nephilim?
Yeah. So if you are, and we'll get maybe into the details of that, you don't have to worry about the consequences of that. You don't have to worry about a salvation issue. The only sin that is not forgiven from a Christian perspective is a sin against the Holy Spirit. And that's a whole different level. It's connected to partly what has been done with the creation of giants, but it's a little bit larger than that. And even if you have a DNA bloodline, even from Israelite law, as was handed down to Moses, sins of the father would not last more than 3 to 4 generations. And I'm not even saying that those 3 to 4 generations might not be a bit, have the ability to be saved and receive salvation. So you have to violate the laws of creation and the laws against the Holy Spirit willfully and not innocently receive either the gene or the blood type that would be associated with the offspring of the fallen angels. So I want to put that, and I know some people disagree with me on that, but everybody has free will and free choice. We can either choose God and Jesus and their ways or not. And that's what dictates salvation. And you wouldn't manifest violations against the law of creation or violations against the Holy Spirit if you had the Spirit in you and you were converted and had faith in Jesus. So I think we want to be clear on that. So when we talk about who are the descendants, there are a lot of descendants of the fallen angels or the gods in polytheism. And I say that because polytheism has the same accounting as the Bible does, just through a polytheist lens. So, for example, where you have the sons of God in Genesis 6 creating the Nephilim, which are giants and are the mighty ones of old, the Gibor, the Giborim. You have the same accounting, and they do that through human females. You have the same accounting in polytheism. So the best example would be in Greek mythology that most people are familiar with. So you have Poseidon, for example, who is going to procreate with a human female named Cleito and is going to create 10 Atlantean Nephilim kings for the Atlantean Empire that was trying to bring about the helm of world government before the flood. You also have, after the flood, you also have gods, offspring gods in Greek mythology like Zeus, who produces Hercules as one example, through alchemy, a human female. And a demigod in ancient ology was the offspring of a god or a goddess and a human male or female, because you get both in polytheism, creating giants before and after the flood. And we can talk about examples of that if you like later. And so you have
when you're bringing up Greek mythology and you're talking about Zeus and the offspring being Hercules and all that, you're not, because a lot of people don't know you that watch my show. You're not saying that that's what you believe in Greek mythology. You're saying there's an overlaying of histories here that we should pay attention to. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a polytheist lens and there's a monotheist lens. And there's going to be a biases no matter how you want to look at it from an objective perspective in terms of what happens. But they're talking about the same events. But in their case, they're looking at giants as being good. There are evil ones as well in the dualism of polytheism, but they still worship that pantheon of gods. In this case, the Olympian gods, both before and after the flood, versus the god of the world. So it's either, you can look at it as either one is counterfeiting the other, or they're separate parallel accounts of the same events, and the details will be a little bit different according to the gods that are being worshipped. And that's the biases. So they're telling, I think, similar accounts. Just as in Greek mythology, they have a race of violent giants that are created before the flood that is wiped out, and then there's another recreation of giants after the flood. And you get that throughout polytheist history as well. And we get that throughout the Bible because you have two different kinds of giants that are described in the Bible. Nephilim, which are before the flood. And in book 2, I really dig into the Rephaim and explain why those are giants created after the flood, and they're not quite as large. They're still huge, and don't have quite as many gifts. And they also come with a fertility issue that is really important to sort of understand. And so getting back to the original part of the question, because again, there's anything that we talk about, there's going to be like a dozen doors open up to go.
Yeah, I'm having to parse through them in my brain as you're talking. Which thing am I going to go back to? But let's get back to the first part of the question of do they exist today?
Do they exist today? So they do, but as the descendants of those giants, for the most part, and I'll come back to what I leave as partially open. So The giants have giant descendants have genealogies that they keep. And they track them all the way back to a specific patriarchal Nephilim or Rephaim and to specific patriarchal godfathers or godmothers. And so they keep those genealogies.
They're tracking those today. They're keeping them today.
And the purity of that bloodline is where they fit in the hierarchy.
Okay.
And what also adds to that hierarchy and is the scioning or a grafting in of other bloodlines that increases their ennobleness. So when they have an ennobled bloodline, that is insinuating a scioning in, and a scion is the first son of a bloodline in each generation. And it's a classic occult double entendre for a number of secret society words and meanings that, again, is another rabbit hole to go down to, but I'll try and stay focused on the bloodline.
No, well, you're doing a great job.
And so these...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And they call themselves, out of history, Rex Deus, as I call them in book 1, and the Royales I explain in book 2. So Rex Deus or Rex Deus is meaning kings of God, as it comes out of Latin. So, and they believe they received the divine right to rule from the assembly of the gods that we would know in the Bible as the council of the gods in Psalms 82 that rules over the 70 nations both before and after the flood, that are listed in Deuteronomy 32, 70 sons of Adam, which we don't get them all listed, but I take at face value because I believe the Bible is truthful and doesn't contradict itself, that there were 70 sons that were born that made up the nations before the flood, the 70 patriarchs that are after the flood, and also accounting for 70 sons of Jacob that are yet to be fulfilled as representing the nations, which is probably a millennium prophecy, and it's something that I would call a dual prophecy that, again, I explain in book 2. So these are the royales, and royales are the kings and the queens. And what people, I like to get people to ask themselves is, what is a royale? What gives them the divine right to rule, as the mighty Prince James like to assert? And they all do, with that royal right of inheritance, just as we saw King Charles III. This is an ancient ceremony that goes back into prehistory and to the authority that the Nephilim and the Rephaim received at the Council of the Gods to rule on the earth.
Can we pause on the royales for just a minute, Gary? Because sure. I know I'm going to forget this question that came to mind, and I definitely want to go back to that. Believe me. All right. So you toppled something that had really, strangely, if the Nephilim or the sons of the gods could ever give a Christian like me peace, when I came to terms that they existed, it gave me peace. I'm about to tell you why. And now you've messed that up with one of your first answers. It gave me peace for this reason. Even as a little boy, when I read the Old Testament and I contrasted that with Jesus and the New Testament and the covenant, the change of the covenants, I was incredibly bothered always with the idea that God had said several times to the ancient Israelites or the Hebrew people, go into this nation and kill every man, woman, and child. I mean, very, very vicious language that today's, but the thing is, I would bring that up to my pastors as a 10-year-old or my grandmother and say, like, what the world is going on here? And they'd be like, well, when those, that was just God's will. And when they died, they went right up to heaven. And I was like, hey, come on. Yeah. You are such a sweet grandma. You would not even want to ever hurt anyone. And yet in this sense, you're just okay with these warriors going in and killing children. This makes no sense until I began to read things about the Nephilim, the bloodlines, and I came to the understanding God was wanting to wipe out this DNA of creatures that weren't intended perhaps to be, that were evil. And I was like, you know what? Okay, well, if they're not human, I'm okay with that. But here you come along and you're telling me, well, Jeremy, if you are Nephilim or you have that bloodline, you can still be saved. And it's well, now I'm all confused again, because I was okay if they're just evil outright. They've got no choice because they're from, Lucifer or something. Sure. Can you make sense of that for me?
I can, and I'll just finish up on royale. That means, as you take that back on its etymology, the kings of God as well. Al is a transliteration of the word for an angel or a god out of Hebrew, El. And it can also show up in Mesopotamia's Ilu. So it means the kings of God. And, and it also means a bloodline. And these are the genealogy the royals keep. And they believe they're the descendants. And the whole nobility class would be, for the most part, the bloodlines, whether it's the priest class, whether or not it's the army leadership class, whether or not it is the educated class or the oligarchical corporate entity right out of ancientology that we see reflected in corporations today as that nobility class, just more further distance from the sort of the mainline royales, bloodlines of the world that still have rights to have a crown for the nation. So when we look at what happens after the flood, and Israel is a nation of slaves. Their faith isn't quite born and forged yet. Even though they have a lot of miracles that are done for them in Egypt, they're still a stiff-necked people, and they are concerned about fighting these people in the covenant land. And if we recognize just for a second, a step backwards, when I talked about the Council of Gods had authority over the 70 nations, each of the 70 nations have a piece of the land on the earth that's overseen by the Council of Gods, headed by Satan, sitting atop of that Council of Gods in Psalms 82. And God has a piece of land as well. That's the land he gifts to Israel as his chosen ones to bring about the Messiah, which is the resolution to the angelic rebellion and the creation of the giants to wipe humankind from the face of the earth and to ensure that they don't receive their salvation.
Please say that sentence one more time. I want to hear you clearly on that, about his response to what you just said. Can you say that sentence one more time?
I'm not sure I can, but the giants.
You said it was a response to him gifting the land. Was a response to what?
A gifting of the land is the land of the covenant. And you would recognize that with the same borders that were in Eden that Adam was overseeing in Eve, from the Nile to the Euphrates. And it's the same parcel of land that is gifted to Abraham in the Holy Covenant that will come down and formalized in the Holy Covenant. And so the giants are the aboriginals in the lands before Babel. So they're created or have survived somehow after the flood. We're not told how. I lean heavily to second incursion, but I'm open to survival as well. And that these giants are all called aboriginals as you take them back to their original meanings of their names and their locations. And after Babel, after 100 years of when Babel was being built by Nimrod, you have the dispersion of the nations, and Canaan, who receives a curse through Ham. Ham doesn't get the curse. None of the other Cush doesn't get the curse, but it's all centered on Canaan. They're not going to move to Africa, the lands gifted to Ham biblically. They're going to go rogue and say, we're not going to be slaves and bonds based on this curse. We're actually going to move in with the giants, and we're going to intermarry with the giants, and we're going to completely violate and desecrate with their actions and what they do the land that they clearly know is the land that God has reserved for himself that will be given to Israel. So now you have giants and hybrid giants would be like 7 to 9 feet tall at that point in time. And they,
Goliath.
Well, Goliath would be 11 feet 3 inches as a royal cubit, as a king of Gath. And even if you use a common cubit, he'd be 9 feet 9 inches.
I'm going to have to put you in touch with my Sunday school teacher because she always said 9 feet.
Yeah, Josephus wrote an interesting comment that the giants, because of their royal credentials, should be measured with the royal cubit, which is a 21 inches versus 18 inches. And he was a Pharisee. He lived amongst the Essenes, and he, for a while, was a Sadducees. And so he understood all of the main sects and the understanding of how you should look at the giants. And so the giants were more or less, and that's 400 years after the Exodus. So Og has a bed that is 9 cubits, and king of Edrei and Ashtaroth, and the last of the giants, which is the Hebrew word Rapha or Raphaim, a post-Diluvian giant. So probably last of the original creation of giants after the flood. And his bed is going to be on a rel cubit almost 16 feet long and 7 feet wide. So he's going to be a little bit smaller than that, probably 12 to 14 feet tall, which is kind of the size of Orontes or Achilles, for examples, out of Greek mythology, which were 12 feet tall. And he would have been 4, 5, or 6 feet wide. And generally they're called stout in the King James Version Bible when it's referencing to giants, which is because they had a height to width ratio of 2 to 1 versus 3 to 1 of a human. So they were wide. Not stout as in fats. Stout as in pure muscle. These were warriors, fighting machines, monsters. And there's another group after the flood that have a different hair color. They're dark-haired and dark-eyed. And Gilgamesh comes from that out of Mesopotamia as a 6th generation son of Lugalbanda and the mother goddess Ninsen. And in both the Ugaritic texts, all of the different languages of the Mesopotamian languages, the common denominator of his size and the only dimensions of his size in all of those accounts is 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide. So he was 7 feet wide and 19 feet tall as king of Uruk. So he would dwarf Goliath even after the flood. So in the land,
that's the monotheistic version. That's not the Greek mythology version that you're talking about.
That's what I just cited about Gilgamesh is out of the Ugaritic text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and several other ones that cite the same sizing for Gilgamesh. But he's understood to be part of the giants of the east, the Cadmonim, or the Olam, or what we would know Elam from a biblical perspective, who would have intermarried with those giants, just as Nimrod intermarried with those giants to create hybrid giants as well. So you have two groups of giants, getting back on topic, two groups of giants in the covenant land who are violating the land of the covenant. And they're waiting for Israel to come about to wipe them from the face of the earth. When Israel comes out of the covenant land, they immediately run into the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites are not a purebred giant variety that is shown in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants. The Amalekites come from Amalek in Genesis 36, so a few hundred years later, with a marriage between the son of Esau, Eliphaz, with Timnah, the daughter of a Horim giant. And we know these Horims are Rephaim, a branch of the Rephaim, because in Deuteronomy 2, when it describes the Horim as giants, that's the word Rapha again, not Nephilim. So these are post-Diluvian giants. And that this is the daughter of Seir, which also goes back to the Hebrew word Sair for satyr or double goat god, which is another rabbit hole and interesting thing. But you have a purebred Horim daughter marrying Eliphaz, son of Esau, brother of Jacob, who received the Messianic blessing, the birthright blessings, and the birthright inheritance through Isaac, through Abraham that we talked about with the land. And so these are hybrids because it's a new dynasty of hybrids between a human, Eliphaz, and a female giant, Timnah, that is going to produce these Shazu, as the execration text calls them, 7 to 9 feet tall. And they're going to go and live in the Petra area amongst the original Amalekim. So the Amalek name is eponymously from a tribe of giants that's recorded in Genesis 14. So it's a mixture of hybrids and giants who are coming out more numerous, greater in numbers, greater in size. All the technology of the iron chariots, the iron weapons that the Rephaim had, and all of the ability to just wipe Israel from the face of the earth with a tribe that's coming out with no weapons, no military training, but God's going to fight for them. But they're trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth because by Israelite law, by the Abrahamic law, they would by wiping Israel out inherit those three blessings, and they could bring about their dragon Messiah. Amalekite biblically is the one that stirs up the other nations to war against Israel, to wipe them from the face of the earth. And this becomes a transgenerational conspiracy with the Amalekites down through King Agag, which is the Agagite title of the Amalekites. That's King Saul and King David fight against. And then after the Amalekites are essentially wiped from the face of the earth for trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, survivors as Agagites in the time of Ezra, when Judah is in exile in Babylon, is trying to wipe them from the face of the earth. This is that conspiracy, and those nations are listed in Psalms 83 that are going to continue that transgenerational oath to wipe Israel from the face of the earth that the giants were involved on, that we mentioned, because the Amalekites recruited them to stand against Israel because they're going to come and take the land. Now, biblically, the giants did not have to fight. They had the option to leave. They knew they had illegally squatted the land. They were told, if you do not leave, we will take you down. Now, they're laughing at these Israelites.
They were told by Israel, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, no. So let's put ourselves in the giant's shoes real quick. Now, you alluded to something saying that they knew that the Messiah was going to come, or maybe I heard you wrong, from the Israelites. Did they really, though? I mean, were they aware in an angel-like sense of God's plan that was going to come through the Israelites, or would they have been dopey large creatures that we just want to kill these people?
Don't confuse two sides of the issues. So, in terms of the Amalekites, they have the Abrahamic bloodline from Eliphaz that would tell them about the Magianic bloodline. From the occult side, they believe in a dragon Messiah of their own Nephilim bloodlines that they would want to bring about. But that psioning sort of gives them a pedigree into both, which would ennoble that pedigree for an Antichrist type figure. So does that answer that part of the question?
It does. Yeah, I didn't realize that about that.
So now, when Israel didn't go directly into the covenant land, they went around the south, east of the Jordan River, passed through Edom, passed through Ammon and Moab, and then they asked for passage from King Og through his lands to cross the Jordan River. And the response from King Og King Sihon first, was to come out and try and wipe Israel from the face of the earth. As soon as they defeat him, and there's also a Midianite alliance that's in there as well that I cover in book 2. That is the end of this Eastern campaign for the things that they tried to do to bring down Israel, both before the wars and as supporting the alliance of Sihon and Og. But Og enters into the war after Sihon is wiped out and goes out to meet Israel in battle and is wiped out. And then Moses, in his last action, is going to mete out accountability to the Midianites before Joshua is going to lead them across the land of the covenant, or into the land of the covenant. So it's the giants who don't want to negotiate, and they think they're going to win so easily. They're going to come out from their giant high-walled fortresses because there's no way they can lose. And so when they cross,
I've thought about that many times. Like if you're talking about regular, Israelite people, probably 5'8", 5'9" average height,
shorter, 5'5" at that time.
So little bitty people going up against these people that you're talking about are
with iron weapons.
I mean, so it had to be God ordained victory only. Period.
He was told to wipe them out because they were violating the land and they were going to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. So when Israel crosses the Jordan River, they announce to Jericho to leave or come out and fight. But they're so afraid of what happened across the river that they stay in. And so it just starts this whole cycle of of war that is kind of inevitable, but it's against incredible odds. The only way Israel can win, and you get a lot of examples, is when they don't follow God's instructions to the letter, they lose a battle and they get their butts whooped quite handily.
Right.
And so between the things that God is going to do to help, like you have the Ark of the Covenant and you have the angel of the Lord. But one of the most interesting things is that, I cover this off in book 2, is that God says he's going to discombobulate these giants. And in the occult tradition, they have telepathy, what they call the hive mind, and that they could communicate and would allow them to work militarily and for other goals more efficiently and get things done that you couldn't normally get done. So if you understand that analogy of the bee and the hive, and that the Anjou part of the bloodlines, not only do they show that belief system in the fleur-de-lis, which has a matriarchal aspect, but they also have the bee aspect as to the drone bee, and part of answering to the queen hive. They show bees in the same imagery for their heraldic imagery. So if you see a bee, that could be understood as a fleur-de-lis, or vice versa. You see both of them out there representing the dualistic nature of the mother goddess and the male god. And so what God has promised Israel 3 times and delivers for them is the hornet. Well, that's really kind of weird. If you think about that, why hornets? Well, hornets are the natural predator and enemy of the bee.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they're working in that hive mind. So what the hornets do is they disrupt that whole communication capability, and they're running around like crazy. And it's very easy for the Israelites to come up to these monsters and lop off their heads to make sure they stay dead.
Wow. As I'm listening to you talk with such assurance. We're talking ancient texts, some of which would be extra biblical text. You mentioned one earlier, I can't remember, but there's Book of Enoch and others. How do you come on interviews and have so much confidence? I mean, do you have confidence that everything you're saying is exactly how it happened, or are there moments of doubt, like, well, I don't know about this particular thing? Real question.
Well, yeah, I think, if somebody reads the preface to book 1, I have doubts as I'm doing this research, all the way through. And it's like I stop many times because I just think this is crazy. And who's going to believe this? But I keep being called sort of back in to continue. And then I get information by hook or by crook, so to speak, that comes to me, and it sort of helps show me the way. So I've learned to have faith that what I don't know, I'll probably find out and probably learn. But you're always learning on your way. But the one thing that keeps me aligned is everything that I research outside the Bible that I might include for context, I can back up with what it says in the Bible. So I use it for additional context, and that I show the differences where they would, depart from being consistent with the Bible, and I'll leave that up for other people. But when I'm talking about these wars on the giants that we just talked about, that's all from the Bible.
Yes. And I think it could be hidden, though, because the way I was brought up, at least Southern Baptist in the southeast of America, small church, the only time we brought up the giants was Goliath. And before the flood, we may read Genesis 6 and then move right past it. And it was like, all those were washed away, done, period, finito. But there was never really any explanation on, there's this descendant that David fought. It was almost like we just had these blinders on. We didn't discuss it. It makes the Bible come alive to talk to people like you.
So book 1, I go, it's designed to let the spiritual forces speak for themselves, and then also tell what the Bible says, and it connects that common sort of history and also kind of what they think about end-time prophecy. So I talk about a topic that I don't really answer in book 1 that I answer in book 2, is about nations that show up after the flood who don't have a patriarch in the table of nations in 1 Chronicles or Genesis 10. Who are they? Where did they come from? They either survive or they have a Rephaim patriarch after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
So, nations that I would talk about in that kind of manner would be like the Perazim, for example, or the Perizzites. And I tend to label giants with an I am suffix in my new book, and then when I'm doing my own research, versus the ites, as people like to used to say, they're all giants. And I would point out, okay, so you're saying the Israelites are giants? Well, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
So no, there has to be a better distinction than that. And it's like, so you get the Avim, you get the Horim, the Anakim names. So you get an I am, that's the male plural, just as Gibor, Giborim, Nephilim, Raphaim. And Raphaim does show up as a tribe twice in the Old Testament, in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, and in part of the land that has the mighty 7 and the mighty 10, because there's 3 additional nations on there also who don't have patriarchs that go back to the Table of Nations. And those are part of some of the nomenclature of the names of the giants that I identify and take back to a Rephaim patriarch after the flood. So when you talk about Goliath, I mean, he's part of the Philistines, right?
Right.
But the Philistine Pentapolis has 5 kings. That's why David takes 5 smooth stones. He's going to be prepared to take on the 5 royal king warriors versus the council of princes behind the kings who appoint the kings in the Philistine Pentapolis, because he's not sure that's just Goliath he's going to fight. He's not taking 5 smooth stones because he thinks he's going to miss. And what he does is, once Goliath is dead, he takes Goliath's head as one of the examples of, amongst others in the Bible, of wanting to make sure he stays dead. And so he takes his head with Goliath's own stone. So he's prepared for 4 other kings he might have to fight that day. In the Pentapolis of the Philistines, you have the Avim that they war with, as Deuteronomy talks about when they're expropriating the land, but they also keep the Avim, and they'll govern over one of the cities of the Pentapolis. The Anakim, they're going to war with too, and they're going to possess 2 of the cities in the Pentapolis. And then the Philistines and their group of, and them being hybrids, they'll have a group of giants that are going to maintain 2 cities. And so the royal higher elders rule the lords or the princes of the Philistines, who appoint the kings of the cities. And it's made up of those other bloodlines. So the Philistines, they migrated from Babel into Egypt and then up to Crete, and they intermarried with dark-haired giants, just like Gilgamesh is a dark-haired giant, just as the Anakim are blonde hair, blue eyes, Horim are red hair, hazel eyes, and a different variety of post-Diluvian giant, and a different variety of, you could have that same, and you do have that same distinction with the Nephilim as well. You have the dark-haired ones,
real quick,
the blonde hair.
This side note, but where did you learn that?
Let me finish. Let me
Okay,
finish.
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be done. So the Philistines intermarried with names that you aren't familiar with as giants. The Cherithim, which are the Cherethites that are listed in the Bible, the Caphtorim, and the Casualhim. And those are the giants, which are the dark-haired giants that the Philistines are the hybrids of, and they expropriate the land. They push out the Avim for the most part and the Anakim, but form part of the southern alliance of giants after the War of Giants and just before the flood. I mean, just before the Exodus.
Okay. Wow. You are a living, walking, talking genealogy tome of giants. It's unbelievable.
I go deeper than anybody ever has. And I do in book 1 and book 2. It's on steroids how deep I go biblically on it. And book 2 is designed for Christians.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pull up those books in a moment. But I want to ask you, so when you talk about hair color, eye color with these different races of giants, is that in the Bible? Like how do you know that?
Where I get that is from descriptions of the Anakim, for example, as blonde hair and blue-eyed and pale skin, and Amorites as a hybrid, blonde hair, blue-eyed, probably from the Anakim as the hybrids. And I get that from descriptions that are either in Egypt or in other countries that describe what they looked like and have depictions on reliefs of them.
Okay.
So they're recording the same accounts from a polytheist perspective and showing what they looked like.
And we're not talking about one or two reliefs. We're talking about like many times when the same nation is mentioned, they're all going to be blonde-haired, blblue-eyed, or hazel and red hair. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And from a Ugaritic text perspective, which is a terrific thing that, and I kind of use that, some of the references in book 1, but I use it directly in book 2 because it's Old Semitic, which Hebrew comes out of.
Okay.
Ugarit was located between Mount Hermon and Tyre, so it was in the land of the covenant. And this is a city that worships Baal and Ashtaroth, post-Diluvian gods, offspring gods versus the parent gods who ruled before the flood. They're responsible for creating the RPM, Old Semitic no vowels, Rapayu or Rapiyum as they're transliterated into English, which is the Rephaim. It would be the PH sound in Hebrew is a later addition. It would be a hard P. So Nephilim would be Nepal or Nepil in the Old Semitic, in Old Hebrew, and in Old Hebrew in the New Testament it would be the same Rapael or just Rappa or not Rappa. I guess it would just be RPM would be the plural for the Semitic version of it before the vowels were put in. And they created, they worshiped the Council of Gods of the Baalim that were located at Mount Saphon, which is understood as Mount Sion, Sirion, or Hermon out of the Bible. And that the Council of the Gods was located there, and the Council of the Tanu. And so in book 1, I cover off Tuatha De Danann with these hair colors and worldwide accounts of the colors of their hair. And I link them back on a superficial way in book 1. I go deep in book 2 on linking them back. These are the tribe of Danu. The Tuatha Danu, as they have many different names. And as they show up in the Bible, they would be Dedan and Datanu in the assembly of the gods, in the assembly of Datanu, Datanu, the assembly of the giants and the royales that created dynastic bloodlines.
Okay. All right. We're about to get into modern day dynastic bloodlines and the global rulers that be today. That's something that I kind of know about, but I want to link that to this antediluvian world that you're talking and post flood as well. But before we go there, I want to ask you, I made a tongue-in-cheek comment about the Smithsonian and how they may not be knocking at your door. I see it going one of two ways with, well, we'll call it big science. Smithsonian's just the museum and all that. But many people, when I bring up these specifics about the Rephaim or the Anakim or giants being discovered in North America, the bones, the first question I always asked, and I used to ask it too, is, well, come on. I mean, they would have all those bones in the museums and the Smithsonian would show it. Is big science working do they know what you're talking about at the upper echelons of big science and they're trying to actively cover it up, or do they not know about it and they need to have you on their shows?
They know about it and they're covering it up.
Really?
So they do. Yeah. They're trying to control the information. They don't want to know that the 4-class system and the feudal system and the destruction of the middle class today to get it back to that old system is populated at the top by the greater nobility of the bloodlines, and that they only want a small entrepreneurial class like bakers and tailors to do some of the work, and then a slave class or a working class to do and build the monuments and fight for them in wars and stuff like that. So they know about this, and all the discoveries, and there was an incredible amount of discoveries of giants made in North America, and two things happen with it. One is that the local university is called. They go collect these bones, and they're typically red hair, elongated skull giants, and dimensions are provided. And then they contact the Smithsonian. They come along and they receive those ooparts, out of place artifacts that they like to not put into their narrative because it doesn't fit, and then they just disappear from history from there. Or the Smithsonian is contacted directly and then they take the bones and they disappear from history. And there's an interesting site. It's called, and if people get a hold of me through my website, I'll send the link to you. It's called Old Newspaper Stories from about 1850 to 1950 and it's a spreadsheet that has a quick description on when, where, and the size of these giants, and then a link to the newspaper story. And you can read the actual newspaper story. And so in those accounts, you get who was contacted and the actual dimensions and where and when. So we have a record of these giants that were discovered in North America that just amazingly disappear. So why is that the case? Why would they hide it? This is supposed to be our history. This is supposed to be putting things on display of history, and yet they kind of disappear. Well, the Smithsonian Institute was funded by James Smithson through his money after he died, and it was sponsored through Masons and Masonic presidents to create the Smithsonian Society to do the Royal Society's beckoning in North America. James Smithson was a Rosicrucian and a member of the Royal Society. And the Royal Society was created by secret societies of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, the first charter in 1662, to dominate science outside of the Roman Church and to dominate education. And all science organizations report to them to this day, as well as education. They still have that much power. These are societies, Masonic orders of royal bloodlines at the Rosicrucian level and higher. You have the nexus point or the intersection point in the thelemic tree of the bloodlines and the lower levels that are introduced through Freemasonry, the Illuminati, then the Rosicrucians, and then above that is the Committee of 300 Families, the Council of 33 Families, and the 13 Families, and that's just the Western organization for the thelemic tree. And then have all of these branch organizations that intersect. So if they were created by Rosicrucians and Freemasons and they're controlling the science aspect of it, it would be controlled through the Rosicrucians. So the Royal Society as a branch organization would intersect to the trunk at the Rosicrucian level. That's how you start to understand the hierarchy of the secret societies and how they intermix with the bloodlines. So you have at the top, you might have royal bloodlines like the Order of the Golden Fleece, for example. And people are probably familiar with that. And they have this little sheep thing that hangs on this gold necklace. Well, the Golden Fleece was the material that was used for clothing for the gods and demigods before and after the flood to help the body from decaying in the physical world. And this is the Order of the Anjou.
Okay. That's an unfamiliar term to me.
Yeah, and Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles has a seat on that table as one of those royal bloodlines of this Anjou bloodline. And the Anjou controls
now, Gary,
today,
before you move on, when you say that King Charles and Queen Elizabeth, are they taking it seriously? Are they like, does this matter to them?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so it's not just they're
the head of
circumstance. We got to do this thing.
No, they have orders themselves.
Okay.
Royal bloodline, and they're one of the more ennobled bloodlines and Antichrist wannabes, because there's several. But currently, the Anjou control the King of Jerusalem title, which they want to crown on Antichrist at the abomination. And
can you slow down and explain what that means? The King of Jerusalem. Now I know everybody that watches, 98% are going to know what the Antichrist is, and they know that we're moving toward that system.
The Dragon Messiah, yes,
and that person. But you said King of Jerusalem currently, right? So we're not talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. What are you talking about?
No. We're talking about King Philippe of Bourbon of Spain, who inherited the title from Juan Carlos through intermarriage between the Spanish bloodlines and the Habsburgs over the last few hundred years. So that title went back to the Habsburgs with the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty as the King of Jerusalem title that they inherited from the Lorraine Anjou bloodlines and intermarriage into the Habsburgs downstream of the families that included Anjou it included Debulia, and it included Depea. And if those names sound familiar, those are names that are founders of the Knights Templar, the modern organization of Western secret societies, as royales at the Masonic royale level. And when the Templars took Jerusalem, they offered Debulian the king of Jerusalem title, and he said, no, I don't want to be the king. But then his brother, Baldwin the First, becomes the king of Jerusalem, accepts the kingship title, and by 1118 in a small priory on the rock of Sion, in a small temple, Baldwin II Anjou, because they're all interrated bloodlines out of the Lorraine region of France, is crowned the king of Jerusalem title. Now, how do they get that title other than usurping it? Well, in their grafting or their scioning of bloodlines, they get their bloodlines down through the Merovingians, who have Nephilim bloodlines, but they also scioned in Davidic bloodlines and in their belief system and what showed up in the Da Vinci Code as a fiction based on their belief system, bloodlines from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. I don't believe that. That's what they say. Yeah. And also King Saul and the Benjamites. What's interesting about that, so they've got both of the monarchies grafted in according to their genealogies that they go, as I say, they track back into prehistory. But in the time of the Exodus, in the time of the wars against the giants, once Jerusalem is apportioned out by Joshua, it's apportioned to the Benjamites. So with that scioning of that bloodline, they are saying we have the rights to Jerusalem and we hold the king of Jerusalem title. Now, within the Anjou, there are three rivals for the king of Jerusalem bloodline. You got a rival from Sicily, of the Anjou of Sicily, and then you also have one more Anjou bloodline. I won't bore everybody in all the details of it, but these are bloodlines that they keep, and they're going to make a move to try and put one of their bloodlines through the king of Jerusalem title as Antichrist. And so you also have King Charles III as a bloodline, who him or his son could be a legitimate rival as well. And there's many bloodlines because there's many Nephilim that were created, and many, there's, according to Enoch, Book of Enoch, there's 200 angels before the flood that created bloodlines, and then again afterwards. So we don't know how many bloodlines are out there, but from a Western perspective, there are a number of families that could present that alternative. King Charles, interestingly enough, when he was prince, he said that he took his genealogy back to Vlad the Impaler, the one that Dracula was based on by Bram Stoker.
Surprised he brought that up in public like it's a good thing.
Yeah, because it is to him.
I mean, he's a famous, notable character in history, but I don't think he was necessarily a good guy.
Well, in their books, they are the good guys. We are the evil ones. It's inverted. So sure. Vlad the Impaler was a red-haired, pale-skinned, hazel-eyed Prince Royal who was educated in the mystery school of Solomon in Vienna and an adept within the mysteries, a high-level adept. And he took his bloodlines back to the egressy of the Greek tribes that descend out of Hercules, son of Zeus and Alchemy. And he's on record saying he has genealogies back there. And how those genealogies work is through the Hanover dynasty that has two unicorns on their coat of arms, and then back through the Middle Europa intermarrying of families. If you want to really start to understand the world, look at World War I.
Okay.
This is an inter-family rivalry war of cousins, of royales. And there's a move from the Western royales to assert their bloodlines in preparation for the end time. So with the fall of, with World War I, you have communism, which is understood within the Masonic terms as social masonry, that creates communism and the manifestos of that socialism and National Socialism, and they fund it. they send Trotsky and Lenin over to Russia to bring down the royal bloodlines of the Kievan Putyanin bloodlines, the original Scythians or giants that settled that area and created the Tsar dynasties, and it settled in about 1000 AD by Vladimir the Great that Putin honors, and then through intermarrying and creating a junior offshoot, the Romanovs take over in about 1600, just as the Plantagenets would be a junior offshoot of the Anjou. So it works that same sort of way. So that's the bloodline that is a pure bloodline than the mixed bloodlines of Europe. And they wanted Russia to lose that bloodline. Out of World War I, you also had the fall of the Kaisers, another bloodline.
Okay.
And then basically the diminishing of the Habsburgs, another bloodline. Right after World War II, they launched communism into, or probably even before it, into China. So they can bring down the Xi bloodline from the Shah dynasties that all the emperors descend from. You have a Xi on, by the way, from the Western bloodline as president in China today. So they took that rival bloodline down. So there are rivals amongst these bloodlines because there can only be one dynasty in the millennium that they're promising.
Well, I understand there's a lot of different charts out there that show like, okay, here's the most powerful families in the world. Here's the 13 families, as you mentioned. But there's a name right at the top that you haven't mentioned all day yet. That's the Rothschilds. They tend to show
they're not at the top. They're not at the top.
Okay. Tell me about that. Where are people getting that wrong?
Well, number one is that it's not that the mystical Kabbalistic Jewish side isn't part of the scioning into the bloodlines and isn't part of the secret societies. It's just where they fit. So the Rothschilds, that's a name that was changed from the Bauer family in about 1808 to 1812. Because they wanted to sort of distance themselves from the Jewish sort of understanding. So the Bauer family was launched as a banking facility for the Royals after the fall of the Templars to replace that banking arm. Cover this all off in book 1. And then they changed their name when they set up the London Bank to the Rothschilds. And so this is a lower level bloodline of Jewish mysticism that was intersecting or nexusing or scioning into both groups. So they are visible, and because they're so visible, they're not part of the invisible ones that the higher levels like to be in the backgrounds of. But they have a very major part, and they would connect in to be probably even associated with either the top level of the Rosicrucians now or into the Committee of 300 that handles all of the banking, right? So, and the Jesuits would be going into the same area, and the Jesuits were the new Templars that were created and then sponsored by Francis Borgia of the Montesa order, who received all of the assets of the Templars in Spain. The organization did that, and it was created to receive those assets by the King of Spain, and he sponsors Ignatius Loyola and actually gets him out of prison and gets him established as an order. And Borgia is part of the black nobility of the popes. He has 2 or 3 ancestors that are popes, and so it's of that line. And there's also a Borgia line in Italy. But anyways, Francis Borgia, he becomes the Grand Master of the Jesuits in 1565 as the third leader of the Jesuits, and by 1570, with the help of the King of Spain and the invasion of Italy at that time, they get their hands on the banking of the Vatican, and then they move that over to Switzerland, where the assets of the Knights Templar had gone to mostly, in terms of the most valuable, into the hands of a sister organization called the Hospitallers, or the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Malta, that has that nice white cross that Swiss has, and that's the beginning of the banking of Switzerland.
Okay.
And now the Rothschilds, who are the banking side created outside the church, they've moved all of their money to Switzerland, and that's where all the money that's off the books in the world is held.
There's some crazy stuff going on in Switzerland. I mean, whether it's in Davos or otherwise, I think CERN is CERN in there. Is CERN in Switzerland?
Yeah.
It's all within like a 10-mile radius. You've got Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Like, it's insane.
Yep. Yes. It has been a safe haven because of its natural protection. Ever since the fall of the Templars.
Do you think Vladimir Putin is fighting a lot of this globalism? Do you think he's a good guy doing some good things?
He's not a good guy. He's not.
I've started to like him, honestly. Yeah. I'll be straight with you. Like,
here's what I mean. Here's what he's saying. He says, I do not buy into the New World Order as the European bloodlines are trying to make that image into.
Agreed.
I just want a larger role and treat it with respect in this New World Order. And I want my old Kievan empire back from his, what he would say, and it was published in Russian newspapers, his Putyanin bloodlines.
Okay.
So he's trying to reestablish, and that's why Kiev is his holy city. He's not going to destroy Kiev. He may destroy the rest of the Ukraine, but not Kiev.
What about the moral decisions he's making? Now, this could just be propaganda, but at the same time, it seems like he's upholding, even if it's Russian Orthodox Church, which I'm not at all, but he traditional Christian values he seems to be putting on a pedestal. Maybe that's just to get some people to like him. But I mean, look at our president, Biden. Mm-hmm. I mean, here he is. I mean, Biden would promote, a transgender pedophile tomorrow if he could get away with it. Whereas Putin's saying, like, we got to get rid of these people.
Do not fall into the trap that they set. And the trap is in their belief system, there are white hats and there are black hats. And there is white magic and there is black magic. There are good witches or evil witches. It's just a standard doctrine in polytheism. And so in that belief system, not mine, in that belief system, the white hats have the better interest of humans at heart.
Okay.
But the black hats just want them eliminated. The white hats say, no, there's a use for humans, but temporarily use for them, but the agenda is still the same. And they still worship the same pantheon of gods. They just have two different tactics of getting there. So we want to be careful to say, well, just because this force is looking, is not as aggressive against us as the other ones, we have to be careful of the belief system because it's a cattle herding effect into the universal religion and into the world government that they're trying to bring about. So as I would say bloodline wannabe. He does claim bloodlines back to the Putyanin dynasty through his grandfather or great-grandfather as a spurious offspring that was outside the legitimate marriage. And so he receives part of that name as part of that inheritance. And then his father had moved to St. Petersburg sometime just before, during, or after World War I. And that's how he ends up in Russia. He is trying to reestablish that Kievan empire.
Right.
But that doesn't mean he has human interests in heart. And from the Greek Orthodox Church, which is supporting him,
yes,
he needs the hierarchy as an Antichrist wannabe of the beast empire organizational structure that was the same structure that was before the flood. And so both before and after the flood, you have giants usurping the kingships. They get control of the armies, and they're bigger and they're powerful, but they also impose, before the flood, Enochian mysticism, Enoch, son of Cain, versus Enoch, son of Jared. There's two Enochs in the Bible. And this is the religion that comes out of what they call the seven sacred sciences that Enoch splits into those seven sciences. Knowledges that he learned from Cain, who Cain learned from Adam. This is from their history, from the Polychronicon. And from Adam that God taught. but they're going to use it to lead people away from God, to dishonor God, to honor their own pantheon of gods, because Cain is worshiping the fallen angels and supplies the daughters to create the giants in Genesis 6. And this is the knowledge that is going to merge with the Enochian illicit knowledge, or the knowledge from gods and polytheism, that's going to take the technology to a level before the flood that we're just catching up to today. This is the seven sciences that become so important that it has to be kept from the mundane, or before the flood, the Sethites. And so they're going to create mysticism, Enochian mysticism, Enochian sun, solar-based worship. And they create degrees. Just as education has those degrees with the seven liberal sciences today, and has the same goals as the original seven sacred sciences.
Can you
and
tell
out
me
of
real
that,
quick, what are those seven sciences, if you don't mind, just real quick?
Yeah, so you have grammar, dialectics, rhetoric, astronomy, arithmetic, astronomy, and music.
Couldn't we have come up with? I mean, those are available though for us to learn about without having some kind of mystery schools or demonic knowledge, right? I mean, couldn't we have way back when? Couldn't the Israelites alone, the good ones, I'm sorry, have discovered and gone down that path?
Well, knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's how it's used.
Right.
Right. So when you look at the organizational structure of universities today, they have you dressed in graduation in black garb, Albigensian or Cathar priest garbs. They have degrees that you're going to get, which is the same system as mysticism, because it's a knowledge cult. Right. You have all the architecture of that's been built. There's some newer architecture, but they do different things on the interiors now to honor the beast empires and the knowledge of those beast empires past, whether it's Egypt, Greece, Rome, wherever. And you honor all the pantheon of the gods and everything that you name. And you create a way to lead people away from God, which is their number one goal. So that they can prepare people for the end time. So you have the same system that's in place. People don't see what's in front of their eyes. You know, if you see all of these Greek gods and Egyptian gods all over the place, whether it's in our government facilities, you understand that they have legal tender over this world. We are, as Christians, living in the sea of polytheism. We live and breathe it. We can't help it. We're just amongst it. And so this is the same organizational structure that comes out of prehistory. You know, the adage in Ecclesiastics, nothing new is under the sun. What was will be again. And so out of that seven sacred sciences, they created the mystery schools to educate not the mundane, not the Sethites. And this was common throughout our history to the last 100 years or so that they're trying to eliminate again. They don't want the mundane to be educated. They just want them for servitude. And so out of the mystery schools come the secret societies as they take their history back to before the flood. And that's why you have initiatory societies, alpha, beta, and the higher levels, like the let's say the black, the Greek black letter groups that were created in the last few hundred years for the chiefs and the bloodlines out of Africa, whether you have the skull and bones for the European bloodlines, they're all prominent in that initiatory society where you swear oaths. And this is the oath-based system that begat at Mount Hermon with the oath of Herem anathema sworn by the angels to carry it out to the end. It's all sort of interconnected. This is the same religion that crosses the flood and Nimrod institutes at Babel. And it's the same religion of the beast empires that Daniel talks about, of the seven empires that are talked about in the New Testament. That is part of that organizational structure. So when I talked about that universal religion, that's the original Enochian mysticism, or as we understand it in the New Testament as Babylon, which goes back to Babel, Hebrew Babel, and the religion that Nimrod instituted.
Okay. That's amazing stuff. You're blowing my mind. And it's hard for me to pick out which thing I'm going to ask. So I want to bring it to a current conflict today that everybody knows about and get your take on how what was happening then applies to what's going on now, not just with Israel and Gaza or Hamas, but Israel and their desire for a third temple. And even, I mean, it is what it is. If you look at our own government, many of Joe Biden's top people that he has appointed to different positions, whether it's Mayorkas or others, have a Jewish background, or they are dual citizen with Israel. And it's just like, how is this possible? So how does that link to everything else you're talking about?
Do you want me to start with the Hamas and what's going on with that?
Whatever you think is best as it applies to bloodlines and a coming of an Antichrist, and kind of, I mean, I know we've only got a short time, but there's got to be something going on there that's more than just, okay, Hamas hates Israel, so they attacked them, and this is just another fight, you know?
Yeah. It's just like that transgenerational blood oath to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, right? It's what Hamas has written into their constitution. It's what Hezbollah is trying to do. It's what the Persians or the Iranians are trying to do out of the Shia, and the extremists in the Sunnis are trying to do as well. This is something that is more than just something that's recent.
Of course.
And so when we talk about that oath that was taken in the time of the Amalekites in Psalms 83, David talks about it even in his time. And he lists these nations that are still conspiring against him to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. And so I don't think Hamas has Amalekite bloodlines. They might, but I don't think so, because most of those were wiped out. But there is the nation of Palestine, which is the home of the Philistines. And that included the Cherithim, the Caphtorim, and the Casualhim, as well as intermixed with the Anakim and the Avim that made up the Philistine Pentapolis, as we talked about.
Right.
And so the Palestinians, would have a bloodline that would carry that oath. I kind of think that Hamas may be part of that bloodline.
Okay.
And then in that group of nations that is also listed is Tyr as having that bloodline and that blood oath to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. There are other nations too, but these are the two that we're talking about right now.
Sure.
And Tyr is at the northern part of the covenant land that Israel had taken during the time of the Exodus. And so Hezbollah is located in Tyr, and they're wanting to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. Is that part of that? But
every time they must be the dumbest terrorists in the world, because every time they do this, where they attack, they lose. And I mean, I feel like Israel has the power of the world for the most part behind them. I mean, whether you're talking about Rothschild money, on both sides of our aisle in America, we're stand with Israel, stand with Israel. I feel like that there's a more sophisticated thing going on where some of the people at the higher levels of Israel are saying, hey, we're going to subversively fund some of these groups to attack our common people that we don't care anything about, because we're going to get to advance.
Yeah. Do I think that Israel is going to be wiped from the face of the earth? No. Is this going to continue and get stronger? Yes. Is it designed to create anarchy? Are the Muslims being utilized by the bloodlines to create this chaos and anarchy? Yes. And it's designed to cattle herd people through wars and rumors of war as part of the sorrows that Jesus warned us about, that will continue to get stronger until the point where there's going to be a covenant that's made where Israel will trade land for peace. You could make an argument for that biblically, but they do sign on to the argument to the covenant that's made in Daniel 9:27, and that will be annulled in the last 3.5 years, as Isaiah 27 and 28 talk about, in the covenant of death that's going to be annulled after the abomination, and after people of Judah recognize who they've been deceived by. They're going.
Do you think it's going to be one of their own people? Do you think it's going to be a Jewish Antichrist?
I think it has to at least present a pedigree that has scion bloodlines in there.
Scion being intermarriage or firstborn
Yeah.
of a mixed.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I think. Otherwise, why would they accept it? There isn't Davidic bloodlines. Why would
there is not, or there is? I'm sorry.
If there wasn't Davidic bloodlines, or weren't presented that Antichrist has Davidic bloodlines, why would the Jewish people follow them? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be something like that in there. And it doesn't have to come out of Israel. And if you look at Daniel 8, in the prophecy of the single-horned unicorn, Antichrist figure, the one that rose up amongst the 10 horns, he is coming out of the Greek Empire by extension. In Daniel 8, between the war between Greece and Russia, and then it moves into what it would be understood as a descendant of Alexander is going to be this Antichrist figure. And so the Greek Empire was split into four. So you've got Egypt, you've got Rome, you've got the Greece area, and then you got the Middle East. And he's going to grow up amongst the Seventh Empire that comes out of the ashes of the Roman Empire. So he could include parts of the Roman Empire. So it's a big area where he could come out of. But he would have to have some sort of pedigree back to deceive the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are primed for a Messiah. They're preparing for the new temple. They're preparing the animals and all the utensils and things that go with the worship that they had in the time when they did have the temple, and they're looking for the temple. It's still a ways away, though, because Islam still controls the mosque. And yes, in Daniel 9:27, it says that the sacrifice will be done on a wing or an extremity or an overspreading of the temple, depending on which English translation that you're reading. So it could be an add-on, but you can't add on to the mosque as things are today. And Josephus places the temple a little bit closer to the valley than where the temple is. So the Holy of Holies is probably on that extension or a week towards the valley between the two mountains. Cover this off in book 2 as well. And that there's going to be required a series of false prophets with catastrophes and the rise of the Babylon religion that consolidates all the religions of the world into this new global religion, which is the old Enochian mysticism. And they're going to make cases like crazy, like Jesus didn't die on the cross. And with Islam, it goes back to Moses, just as Judaism does and Christianity does, and he brought the religion.
You said
Egypt.
Crazy ideas that like Jesus didn't die on the cross, but that's what.
I'm sorry. Did I say that wrong? That Jesus didn't. That they're going to say crazy ideas that Jesus didn't die on the cross, except that he did, and then he was resurrected. They're going to deny that. They're going to bring out evidence to that, just as they're going to discredit Paul, just as they're going to take the three. What is called monotheist religions back to Moses. That's where they all join and say that he was educated at Heliopolis into the mysteries, and he didn't bring back monotheism. He brought back the religion of Egypt, and then with the monarchy, the religion went rogue into monotheism to create a mythos for the monarchy. That's the general rule of thumb. They're going to do all sorts of things like that to try and bring them home to the Enochian mysticism from before the flood, because that's part of the hierarchical structure that has to be in place.
Yes, it's amazing stuff. And I mean, I could talk with you for hours about this, and most of the audience loves to talk about it. But one big question, and this is the one we need to end on due to time, as believers, if we are believers in Jesus Christ, that he, died for our sins, rose again, and he is our hope and salvation. But we're interested in these things. But it sounds to me like, okay, the course is set. The way you're talking about Daniel, and not everybody that watches, I don't even know totally where I stand on how Daniel is relating to the end times. But let's say that it's all just set in motion already. Then knowing about these things is interesting with the bloodlines and all. But does it practically matter to us? Because we can't really change it.
It does, because Jesus forewarned us. even the elect will be deceived if that were possible, and it will be. So we're going to see things come about that is going to prepare us to accept Antichrist and to, accept the mark of the beast. And that time of temptation, as talked about in Revelation 3, is so difficult that he will save us from that time or that hour of temptation. That's how strong the deception will be. And he will save us from the wrath as well. But that hour of temptation is the hour of the 10 kings in Revelation 17. In that hour, Hora, Greek, will hand their power over in like mind or hive mind to Antichrist, which will then destroy Babylon and set up his own religion in the last 3.5 years. And when the abomination happens, this is the same hour that is described in Revelation 14, when Babylon is described, when we're getting the summary of the details to the last 3.5 years after the first fruit martyrs are seen in heaven with the 144,000. And just after the gospel has been preached the last time by the angel, where the two witnesses for 3.5 years, 144,000 would have been doing that alongside for that first 3.5 years. But it's that hour of destruction that is described in Babylon, that Babylon is destroyed in 1 hour. And it says that 2 or 3 times. And this is the same hour of the multiple antichrists in the epistles of John is talking about. Okay. This is the same, and when it says the time of these antichrists, and this is the same hour that Jesus is coming back for to save us from. If he doesn't save us from that, many of the elect, and the elect aren't just the chosen people of Israel. Elect is used in the New Testament many times to describe the Christians, are going to be deceived by the delusions, the deceptions, the false prophets, and things we can't even imagine that are going to be thrown at us. So yes, it's important to be able to put on the armor of God, to understand what the spiritual forces are going to be doing as best as we can and prepare for that, lest we be deceived.
I'm so glad you said that. You wouldn't know this, but among my audience, and that they don't fight over it. Well, sometimes they do in the comments, but we got to acknowledge the fact that 95% of evangelical Protestantism in the United States is going to believe this idea of the rapture. And I grew up with it, all of that. And most of those people would hear what you just said about even the elect could be deceived. And then you follow that by saying, and they will be. The people that subscribe to the rapture belief would say, no, because the days are going to be cut short. I'm going to be raptured, meet him in the air. And so I won't have an opportunity to be deceived at that level. So what I hear are you saying that this is not a rapture discussion, but is that still in the cards for you, or is that not?
Well, there'll be a rapture. It's a matter of when. And that's what really sort of divides so many people and Christians, and it shouldn't. I mean, do I pray for a pre-trib rapture? Of course. Who would want to go through the last 7 years? Any of the last 7 years or the last 10 years. But I prepare for tribulation and to be saved from the wrath in the year of the Lord's wrath, which is in the last year. But the timing would suggest from what Jesus talks about, the chronology of the end time and his coming, and all of the passages, that it would be not a pre-trib, it'd be just slightly after the midpoint of the last 7 years. So we will go through tribulation. And people confuse tribulation with wrath. They're two different Greek words that describe different things, similar but different. And we ought not to conflate tribulation and wrath. And that the understanding of prophecy begins with, in my opinion, in my approach, is putting everything around what Jesus said, not vice versa. And he gives you a chronology of events. And we know that because he says, and then this happens. That's the Greek word then is tota. It's the when. It's the sequential events. And he gives us a chronological order with his coming after the abomination, that he points us to Daniel for understanding of the timing. Okay. And that you have the book of Revelation that can be understood through the template that Jesus provides in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, Luke 21. And I put the additional details on what the other two Gospels do on top of Matthew 24 because it's got the most complete template for the information that Matthew doesn't have. And we can assuredly overlay Revelation on that because Jesus is communicating in Revelation 1 through 2 and 3 that this is his testimony that is given to the angel that provides the vision for John to write down. It's his testimony. He is not going to contradict what he says. So when he gives us the template, understand that you can understand Revelation with Jesus' template given in Matthew 24. You just have to sort of look at, the churches as being at that time and then forward as well, in what I would call a dual prophecy. I don't have time to explain it. And the last 7 years, starting around the time of the opening of the seals in Revelation 6, and that the details of Revelation through to Revelation 14, say about 8 or 9, is the first 3.5 years. And then you get the summary in exact chronological order for the balance of Revelation 14, beginning with the destruction of Babylon, and then the mark of the beast, and then Armageddon, that you get in the details between 15 and 19, and then you have the millennium, and you have the Greek word kahi for and that is used to give you sequential events. And inserted in there in the timings, you get the throne scenes that's showing you what's going on in heaven that leads into the next set of events. So you can actually overlay the first half of what Jesus talked about in Matthew 24, 7 through 15 to 20, where the abomination is, up to the midpoint where the 144,000 first fruits are shown as martyrs dying by the inference there as testimony for the testimony of Jesus, just as those in Revelation 6 were told to wait for those to come out of the Great Tribulation, to be martyred for the testimony of Jesus like they were. So the first fruits are before Revelation, or the last 7 years. The tribulation of the saints could be the first 3.5 years, or it could be part of the 10 days of tribulation Revelation 2:10 talks about. And that's why they're described in Revelation 7 as being the tribulation of the saints. That's the Greek word thalipsis.
Okay.
And it means tribulation, trouble, affliction, things like that. And cognate for the Hebrew sarah, for the time of Jacob's trouble, and for the trouble in Daniel 12:1. But more importantly, it is the word that is used to translate affliction in Matthew 24, about verse 8, and it should probably be translated as tribulation, or where you see tribulation, it should be probably maybe translated as affliction to keep it consistent in English. And that's the tribulation of the saints, which is separate than the tribulation of the world not seen since creation, which shows up in Matthew 24:21. Going back to the Greek word thalipsis, and you get a parallel account of that tribulation not seen since the beginning of the world in Mark 13:19, where it doesn't say tribulation, but it's the same wording. And what is the word? It says affliction. So there is a great tribulation that happens in the last 3.5 years, not seen since the beginning of the world, separate from the tribulation of the saints. And it's a cognate word for sarah, as I said before, when the time of Jacob's trouble and the second Exodus will happen with part of Jesus' visitations, Hosea 9:7, multiple, or the sons, or the days of the Son of Man, in plural, as Luke's accounts talks about, for rapture, for Exodus, and then for Armageddon is the multiplicity of that, and that it is distinct from wrath, used in the New Testament as orge and thumos in Greek. So we need to understand that when in Daniel 12, in the time of trouble, sarah, when Michael stands, is the midpoint, just as when Judea flees from Jerusalem is the midpoint because of the abomination and is going to be protected for 3.5 years, and that begins the Great Tribulation. And after that, we get Jesus' sign when he's going to come in the last days, at the time of the great trumpet or the last trumpet, and in Revelation 10 and 11, I know I'm moving very quickly here through a lot of scripture. That's the days of the seventh trumpet when the mystery of God will be fulfilled. In the days of the seventh trumpet, and then you get the bowl wrath in the year of the Lord's wrath, and the last year of the last 7 years. So what I do is I put everything around what Jesus said. In the new book, I talk about my approach so people understand whether they agree or disagree with me. But here's the thing. If you can't include all passages and make it fit, and you have to reimagine, reinvent what something says or dismiss it altogether, something is wrong in that approach. And the trouble with a pre-trib rapture is there's so many passages that point to the timing versus, being after the midpoint versus before the last 7 years. And you just can't make them go away. And people will say, well, John was raptured. Well, no, he wasn't raptured because he came back and he delivered the letters to the 7 churches. And he was in vision, and he was taken in spirit in vision to see the prophecies. So no, he wasn't raptured. He had a very unique experience, but that type of vision prophecy is common in the Old Testament.
Wow. Man, I hope that God grants us all the ability and maybe some of the time. I know we don't all have the time to dig as deep as you have to gain an understanding of these things, because it is, upon just a basic reading of the text for the average person, it is difficult. And I'll run across expert like yourself and others that may hold you're all believers, but holding slightly different positions that know the text way better than me. But all of you are very assured that the way that you have it is the right one. So it
one exception to that. In my approach, everything has to fit. Okay. And if I come across something that surprises me, I have to be able to make it fit. And if I can't resolve it without reinventing what it says or dismissing it, I go back. And those are my guidelines. And I'm not saying I'm a prophet, because I'm not. I'm a researcher. I only put it together how the pieces come together, and I need to have sort of no contradictions in there. And I show that in a fairly, not all of it, because it's so much that's in prophecy, but I show how you use the effect of not ignoring inconvenient passages and putting it around what Jesus said in Book 2. And one more plug for Book 2. As unique as Book 1 is, and it tells the global perspective, Book 2 is written because Christians wanted to know more what was in the book. And this, if you're familiar with, let's say, Dr. Heiser, and I've not read his work, I've only heard people talk about it. This is going to go way beyond Dr. Heiser in terms of how deep it goes, and gives you an understanding based on Greek and Hebrew words. But it is as unique as the first book, and there's no other book on the market that's going to be like this one, and it goes deeper than anybody else does. And Book 3 will be, hopefully, if I do my job right, equally as unique.
You know what, Gary, I believe you. I'm going to get the books as reference material, because man, it's complex, and I need it. We need it. So check out those books. Can we go to Amazon to get them, or do you just go to your website?
Both. So, but the easiest way to get hold of my book is through my website, genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the genesis6conspiracy.com, with the number 6. And if you want to ask me questions, you can there's a contact the author there, and it may take me 3 to 4 weeks to get back to you, but I will get back to you, because I get a high volume every day, and I work on emails every day. Or if I mentioned a document, you may want to get a hold of me. Like I have the Giant Wars as a series of documents, for example. But if you ask me a question, I have a document on it, I'll explain it, and I'll also say, would you like the document? And you can follow it biblically as I go through on that. On my website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of Book 1 and all 98 chapters of Book 2. Just the table of contents is going to grab your attention. And if you think you know the whole book by the generous excerpt, it's only a small drop. I mean, I could talk forever and not talk about everything that's in the book, I think, sometimes on both of them. Yeah. And so if you wanted to order a signed copy, you can go to the buy now for book 1 or pre-order for book 2. I'm hoping that book 2 will be out shortly. It's being printed and assembled as we speak, so we're going to beat the March 12th release date that was put out. And you can get, if you're in Canada, there's a Canadian page. If you're in the US, there's a US page. If you're anywhere else in the world, there's an international page. That's how you get a signed copy. If you want to link over to get the digital version, I have the Amazon link up there that takes you right to Kindle for book 1. And my website guy is working on the weekend to get the new link and the new cover color up on that you showed on the screen on my website this weekend, and you'll be able to pre-order there as well on Kindle. There are also links on all of the pages for barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca to buy book 1 or to pre-order book 2 as well.
Excellent. Well, Gary, there's one question I didn't get to ask you today, but we're going to save it for next time. And that's just give us a primer. This is kind of a primer for the next show of all of the creatures that are above animal consciousness. I wanted to actually start with that today, but we went down a rabbit hole immediately because I know that there's way more than just the Nephilim, the Rephaim, demons, angels, and God. And most people don't know that. So
here's the tidbit for people to think about.
Yeah.
There are the invisible ones and there's the visible ones. And just as there's a hierarchy of angels, both loyal and rebellious, that's Saba or host, which means army, an army of angels, so rank and order. And there's a hierarchy within the angelic realm. And then within the visible ones, there is a hierarchy as well of not only giants, but other spiritually or DNA created groups. And you might include, obviously, the giants, the disembodied spirits, and the elementals as some of that. And yes, that's a huge topic in itself.
Yeah, I can't wait to have it with you. I've heard you talk about it a bit on other interviews, so we'll dig in next time. Gary, thank you for being so generous with your time today, and I look forward to having you on again, sir.
Terrific. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Wow. Big Gary Wayne blew my mind there. Gosh, hard to keep up. That's why I said I want to get his book as reference material. I may not agree with everything he says. It would be impossible for him to be correct on every single jot and tittle from stuff that's, from the Antediluvian to the secret societies, to the royals and their involvement, to Israel, Gaza, to things he didn't even bring up. It would be impossible. Right. And some of you guys have said before to me, like, hey, why didn't you stop him here? Why, what about this? It's like, I'm hosting an interview. I can't stop everywhere, to ask all the questions I'd like to ask or to push back or whatever. But I'll tell you one thing, when it comes to the giants and the questions that he answers around the Nephilim, the Rephaim, all of those things, it's just fascinating to me. And truthfully, it does make the Bible come alive. And the more you study people, I didn't know some of the things he said about Putin, but in terms of the royal family in Britain, and I mean, that's just the most famous one, but you go to any like major power in the world and where they came from, and you're like, wait, it's not like they were just talented and they rose their way to the top. I know there's some of that happens within the families, but that was a question I did not get to ask him has there been outliers that have completely, just due to talent, effort, dedication, and understanding who the secret societies were or whatever, they came in from the outside, rose to the top of a nation and became a king, a president, or the head of, a BlackRock sort of a thing, which we know Larry Fink and what his genealogy would be. Anyhow, so here's the thing, guys. If you want to hear my real thoughts on this, you want to hear me go deep, I'm going to do the show after the show on Instagram. You have to be I'm going to do the show after the show live for everybody. Then it'll only be available for subscribers. All right. I'm heading over there and give myself 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, we're going to put this show on Instagram with the show after the show. Please subscribe on Instagram. It's $5. It's chump change compared to, everything else these days. I know expenses can be heavy. That's why I need you to subscribe. Need you to support my efforts. All right, guys, I'll see you over on Instagram. Let's get this done. Have a fantastic weekend. Love you guys. And thanks for watching J Slay Made in the USA.